Welcome to the Innovation Meets Leadership podcast. Real inspiration for real innovators. If you're looking for innovation and leadership transformation, your journey starts now.
Welcome to the Innovation Meets Leadership podcast. I'm your host, Natalie Born. Hey, did you know my new book is out, Set It on Fire, The Art of Innovation? Head over to setitonfire.co to learn more. My guest today is Tim Fischer, and Tim is the president of Jackson & Coker. With more than 30 years of experience in the staffing industry, he has a proven track record of successful leadership and a deep understanding of how to impact lives and drive corporate outcomes. Before joining Jackson & Coker, Tim served as the president and of Medical Doctor Associates and also held roles at RCG Global Services and IMI Systems. Welcome to the podcast, Tim.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, you have just a really interesting background and career. And I think probably like a lot of people after listening to your bio, they're thinking, how did you get your start?
That's a big question, right? For all of us. I grew up in a very rural town in a small town, Illinois, not Chicago. That's what I always tell people, downstate. And I think, where you grow up shapes your perspective on life. So that I think kind of shaped the lens that I look at the world through. And then I had some defining moments before I got into the workplace, just like we all do. I went to the Air Force Academy out in Colorado Springs for 2 years, got my butt kicked out there, learned I wasn't as smart as I thought I was, learned I wasn't as good of a basketball player as I thought I was. It was a very, very good experience in hindsight for me to have when I was 17 years old. But at the time, it was very humbling. When you think you have it all figured out and you learn that you don't. And I think that happens to most of us. It's good that it happened when it did. And then that shaped when I went into the business world. The whole premise of the Air Force Academy in West Point, Annapolis, is that you have to be a good follower before you can be a good leader.
Mm.
So I was taught that at a very young age, and it really helped me as I went through life to understand that if you're not a good follower, you can't be a good leader. Moved into the staffing industry and did IT staffing for about 25 years. And then I've been doing locum tenens for the last 7 years. And I love it here in Atlanta. My wife and I have 2 sons, and they're both older, and we're empty nesters. So it's a new stage of life, and we're having a lot of fun.
I love that. Well, it's interesting just to hear kind of how the Air Force as well just shaped a lot of, how you thought about leadership. I would love to just ask what were maybe some other nuggets or some other just things that you want to pull forward and say, hey, as I was leading or as I was being led, here are some things that just stood out during those different seasons that you went through.
Yeah, I mean, I started as a recruiter in the industry and worked my way up. So I've kind of done every job. And I think that helps me lead better because I remember what it felt like and how hard those roles were. So, I mean, and I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but I think common sense is rare today, unfortunately. And in leadership, a lot of what we talk about or books we read or anything is really common sense. I mean, more often than not, when I read something, I go, oh, that's good. I already knew it, but it reinforces what I'm not doing.
Mhm.
So things like you have two ears and one mouth for a reason. Like when people get big titles, they stop listening. And I don't understand that because I think when you move up in an organization and you're responsible for more, you have to listen more. But
Mhm.
yeah, I mean, that's pretty common sense, right? The golden rule, not that hard. Treat people like you want to be treated. But again, when people start to, I've seen this in my career and I've worked for people like this, that when they get a big title, they act differently. And I tell the story of when I was a freshman at the Air Force Academy, or a dually, as they call it. You weren't called by name the entire first year of college. It was a little different version of college. I was playing Division I basketball. I wasn't called by my first name for an entire year. And it's not fun. Let's put it that way. It's not fun. So then when you become a sophomore or a third degree, you're supposed to be the one yelling at the dualies.
Mm.
And I saw people who, as a dually, just hated it. And then when they became a third class cadet or a sophomore, they were yelling at people exactly like they got yelled at and they handed it. That was my first glimpse into real leadership. And sometimes when people move up in an organization, they forget what it felt like to be that dually. I mean, the golden rule is pretty straightforward, but I'm amazed at how often it doesn't happen. And so things like that are really common sense, people seem to forget as they have success.
Yeah. This is actually a very powerful conversation around what it looks like to carry power well. I think that it's a struggle to really even understand how you're going to carry power until you get into that situation. But you're right. It does almost become a little bit like mob rule, where you turn around and just become a part of the mob versus thinking for yourself and thinking, how did I feel when I was in that position? And what should I do differently as a result of that? I think it can just be like, very much mob rule, and I'm just gonna act as the crowd acts. This actually happens, and you already know this, but this happens a lot in culture, in company culture, right? We just kind of can get swept in. First couple months that you enter a new company, you see things with fresh eyes. "Oh, why do we do that? What is that?" 6 months, a year in, you're doing the same things that you were questioning when you first stepped through the door.
That's right. And I think the good news is nothing that we're talking about requires talent. And that's good for me. But it really doesn't. I mean, it just requires listening. And a lot of these things, I think what I have seen in my career again, and I'm towards the tail end of my career, is that people lose their minds when they get success.
Yeah. Wow. Well, we're gonna dig into that more because I feel like that is a really important point of leadership, and especially thinking about again, I don't know why, but I just have this phrase that I've been thinking about lately, which is how people carry power matters. And the bigger the power differentiator, the more you have to go out of your way to do exactly what you talked about, listening, asking for feedback, asking how things are actually going, not what I want to hear, or not surrounding myself with people that tell me what I want to hear, but really getting out there and asking people to give you a true lens of what's really going on.
That's exactly right. And I mean, little things. I'll give a real life example. I try to build into my daily plan an hour every day where I'm walking around. I'm just walking around our building, and I try to see everybody that's here in the office that day. And the first week when I just started this job, people were freaking out, and I'm like, "Why are people like freaking out?" And they said, "Well, we're not used to the leader of the company walking around and asking us how we're doing." And one of the people in our accounting department told me a story later, about a year later. She said, "The first day when you came down and walked around and walked up and said, 'How are you doing?' and asked everybody." And she said, "When you walked away, I said, 'We won't see him for another year.'"
Oh, wow.
But yet I was back every day. And then, and now, yeah, I've been here a little over 4 years. Now, if I miss a couple of days in a row, if I'm traveling or something, I'm catching grief. I mean, the psychological safety it's kind of fun to watch how it's evolved just in my 4 years here at Jackson and Coker, because we went from people like, "Oh my gosh, what, something wrong?" He's walking around, to now they're like, "Hey, where you been? What's wrong with you?" So that just people letting their guard down, and knowing that, we're all doing this together and I'm no more important than they are, which I'm not. They're powerful. I mean, that's powerful to have a culture where everybody understands that.
Yeah, I love this because, as people are listening and they're thinking about how do you spark innovation, a lot of what we spend a great deal of time talking about on this podcast is psychological safety. And that really, when you can innovate from a place of psychological safety, you find that people are more willing to provide their ideas, they're more willing to collaborate, they're more willing to kind of take that journey with you in the world of innovation. And so I think that to your point, these principles, they seem simple, but most people don't put them into practice. So when they are put into practice, it becomes really powerful. And so to me, I want people to kind of go back, listen again to what you just said, because really what you're leaning into is one of the principles for innovation, which is psychological safety has to be at the center of your organization, how you build things, what you build. and where you guys go together, the journey that you're taking it on. And so, as a leader, figuring out different ways to build in psychological safety is the difference between people telling you when there's a problem and people hiding the problem from you.
Exactly. And I have found in my career that innovation does not happen if people are not comfortable failing. I mean, it's just fundamental to innovation. If there isn't the psychological safety that you're talking about, and people aren't comfortable making mistakes or failing, then you're not going to have innovation.
That's right. That's right. And let me say yes, and a lot of, what we lean into when we think about innovation is, are people allowed to make mistakes in a safe environment, fail forward, pull their failure out into the middle of the floor, talk about it, learn from it. Does failure trigger learning or does it trigger shame? And I think that is really the heart of what psychological safety is all about. Which one of those is being triggered within your team? And how do we handle it when maybe what we hypothesize doesn't actually happen? How do we actually handle those moments? And as leaders, I think it matters. It makes a difference. And thinking through how you want to handle that before it happens is actually pretty critical.
I love how you put that. That's a great way to articulate what we're talking about. And I think allowing people to fail, the best way to do that is to fail yourself and publicly say, "Hey, I messed up. Here's what I learned though." You either win or you learn. We say that all the time. You either win or you learn. So this was a learning opportunity for me. And here's what I learned. And then people are like, okay, well, if he's being vulnerable, I think leaders can be humble and confident. And a lot of times people, they don't want to be vulnerable because they think, oh, I have a big title. I'm supposed to have all the answers. No, you're not. And I think people appreciate a leader who says, you know what, I messed up and I'm going to do better next time. Or I don't know. I mean, those are powerful words. I don't know.
Mhm.
I know I'm supposed to have all the answers, but I don't. I'll find out though. So there's a way to build that psychological safety so that innovation happens naturally because people are comfortable thinking outside the box and failing often.
That's so powerful. I want to shift gears and kind of look at your industry. I think one of the great things about having this conversation is we get to look at different industries and look at some of the trends and things that are going on in those industries. Talk a little bit about some of what's taking place in your industry. I know deep technological advancements, shifting patient needs. I know there's a lot taking place kind of in the healthcare industry as a whole. How does that impact you guys, your organization, and then how are you kind of looking at the landscape right now?
Well, we are in healthcare to your point, and the locum tenens industry is what we do. And people may not be familiar with that term locum tenens. I was not until I got into the industry. It's a word that means to take the place of. When locum tenens was started in the late '70s, physicians in rural America or underserved areas would take vacation, and they were the only doctor. So they needed a temporary physician to come in for that week that they were off, or 2 weeks, or whatever it was, and they could take some time off. So that's how the industry started. Was more people taking PTO and taking trips. And if the small town I grew up in, we didn't have a lot of doctors. They didn't go to med school to come to my small town. So that that has kind of led to where we are today, where we just don't have enough physicians in the U.S. There's a shortage of physicians. So in a nutshell, what we do as a locums firm is we take physicians from areas that have plenty of them and they partner with us. We don't employ them, but they're independent contractors, and we pair them up with facilities in towns like the small town that I grew up in that need physicians and advanced practitioners, NPs and PAs to see patients. I mean, I think I don't think people understand in the United States, we have a lot of areas in this country where people don't have access to healthcare, or they have to drive a long ways to see a physician or a NP or PA. So there is a lot of inequity in our system, and we're trying to help that by alleviating the pressure of a lot of these rural communities or underserved communities that don't have access to quality physicians and advanced practitioners.
Wow. It's really interesting to hear your business, kind of how you guys function. In my space, we work with a couple of hospital clients, and they just did a survey, and it showed that 80% of the people that took the survey weren't planning to be in the medical field in a year, which is terrifying. What you really are leaning into is that not only do we have kind of the pockets within these communities where there might not be enough healthcare, but in addition to that, there's a bigger kind of conversation on the rise about the availability of healthcare and the longevity of those who are in healthcare today.
That's exactly right. And yeah, I think there's a big problem and a lot of people are not aware of it. I was not aware of it before I got into this business. But we just yesterday we actually just announced a partnership with the Dr. Lorna Breen Heroes Foundation. And that's in honor of Dr. Lorna Breen, who was an ER physician in New York during COVID and contracted COVID herself and was working 18-hour days trying to save people, had people passing away on her watch nonstop, and the mental toll that took. So she got COVID, and then she had, from a mental health standpoint, she had people around her that loved her, her family, and they had her see a mental health professional. And then she was worried because she raised her hand and said she needed help, that she was going to lose her license. And tragically, she took her life,
Ugh.
and we lost someone that we should not have lost. And this is happening much more than people know. And it was because there was a stigma associated with raising your hand and saying, "Hey, I'm not doing okay. I need help." And physicians, a lot of physicians, not all, but a lot of physicians feel like, again, like we said earlier, we're supposed to have all the answers. We're supposed to take care of other people. But if they don't take care of themselves, how can they take care of other people? So there's a real problem in our country. And that leads to those stats that you were sharing. There's a lot of people saying, I'm going to get out of healthcare. There's a lot of physicians walking away from their profession and they're not retiring. They're going and doing something else. And we've never seen that before at the levels that we're seeing it today.
How can what you guys are doing contribute to the bigger conversation? Because I think that when I hear what you're doing, a lot of what you're doing too is providing relief, reprieve, so that people can get their mental health in order. Not that that's the main reason, but I see it as kind of a secondary benefit to what you have in place.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I think it is a two-pronged answer. I mean, there's the patients that are in areas where they don't have access to good health care. So we're trying to help solve that. While we're doing that, we have an opportunity for physicians to partner with us who maybe are working somewhere full time and their mental health is not because they feel underappreciated, undervalued. They are having burnout because of administrative burden. I mean, a lot of the administrative burden that physicians and advanced practitioners have. They went to med school to see patients. Now they're spending a lot of time, filling things out and all the paperwork and the administrative tasks. So the great thing about coming to partnering with us as a locum tenens firm is you get to pick your assignment. You get to pick where you want to go. You get to pick when you want to work. And we help with all the paperwork and the credentialing and all the administrative tasks. In theory, you just go out and you get to see patients. And obviously, you can pick the facility if it has a good culture, if it's a good place to work. And that's a way for physicians to get back where they want to be, as opposed to just continuing forward and not feeling comfortable raising their hand and saying they need help. We tell people all the time, if you're doing locum tenens as a physician and you're burned out, you're not doing it right.
That's powerful. I love the fact that we're leaning into this. I almost, oftentimes on this podcast, we talk about what the future of work looks like. And I could see this being one of those key thrusts of what the future of work looks like. We know that the, gig economy, if you will, has gone through the roof. We know that a lot of organizations are calling people back to the office, and those things can sometimes be a little bit juxtaposed to one another. But when you think about kind of this landscape and you think about what you guys do, I could really see this being one of the key thrusts of how people work in the future and how they kind of work forward.
Yeah, it's an opportunity. I mean, people in locums, we we say we're not really part of the gig economy just because there's a stigma associated with that. And if a lot of our physicians who are going to small town Illinois, like where I'm from, they still have a full time job in New York or
Mhm.
Boston or somewhere. And they're going in and they're working a couple weekends a month or something like that. So a lot of them still keep their full time roles, and then they're helping us and they're helping the communities that we serve to provide quality physicians. So it really is an opportunity for people to help, which is why, most physicians went to med school, but also to take care of themselves. And I think that's the piece. I wasn't aware that there was the stigma and the issues that a lot of these physicians are fighting. And
Mhm.
it makes sense because COVID was traumatic for everybody, but
Yeah.
it was very traumatic for people who were right in the middle of it. And it hasn't really stopped. So I think sometimes we expect doctors to have all the answers and to be superheroes, but they're human beings just like we are.
Mhm. Yeah. Wow. Let's shift gears a little bit and talk about purpose. Because I think when I zoom out and think about what you do, what Jackson and Coker does, there's really a huge purpose driven piece here that almost kind of extends beyond, one individual, one person, which makes it really exciting, I think, to do the work that you guys do. Would you talk a little bit about one, how can people find their purpose in work? Two, how have you done that? What does that look like for you? Because as we know, right, as we read the articles and look at everything, people really are looking to connect to purpose. They don't just want to come to work to come to work. They want to do something bigger than themselves.
And I think Gallup's recent workplace survey was very, very telling to me. 21% of workers in the US feel appreciated and they're happy in their workplace. One in five. So 79% of workers in the US feel a lack of appreciation. And that's as soon as they can, they're going to look for another opportunity. I mean, those numbers are staggering. Four and five are not when they wake up in the morning. And I've had one of those jobs where you get that pit in
Yeah.
your stomach. You're like, oh my
Yes.
gosh, I have to go to work.
Uh-huh.
Uh, but I mean, 80% of people are
Yeah.
feeling like that. So I think there's a real opportunity where you have good leadership and you have a true value proposition around purpose like we do. I mean, I can get people excited and we don't have any trouble getting people to work at Jackson and Coker because when we tell them what our mission is and people have a purpose in their own life and they understand that they can help people all over this country by doing their job with excellence, they connect the dots and that it's not just picking up a check or a job. It's like I have to do my job with excellence, or somebody out in some state that I've never been to is not going to see a physician. I mean, that's powerful. So I think having a why in our lives, each of us having a why is very powerful. Now, both of my sons are in their mid to late 20s, and they always tell me, Dad, I haven't found my purpose. And I always feel bad for that because I think when we talk about purpose, we expect people to always be able to articulate what their purpose is.
Mm.
And I don't know about you, but it took me a while to
Yeah.
find my purpose
Absolutely.
and to understand why I was put on this earth. And I think we put a lot of undue pressure on people coming right out of college and think they're just supposed to have their purpose for the rest of their life. And I always tell my sons, directionally go that way
Mhm.
and you'll find your purpose. But
That's
it
right.
may take a little time to do.
Yeah. That's really interesting. I also think about how a lot of the way we probably found our purpose was by trying things, by trying a job or a role and saying, "You know what? That's not for me." Try something else and saying, "You know what? That's really interesting. Something about this is sparking life in me. Something about this is bringing me alive." And so, even in those small things of just trying things and trying different types of roles and working in different types of organizations, I think people can start to get closer and closer to articulating that. But to your point, we try to ram everyone down a path. Choose your path early, right? You got to know by eighth grade what you're supposed to do with your life. And that just creates a lot of stress and pressure. And I would say, I probably had a unique upbringing working at a company that was growing really, really fast. And so every year, most people were moving into another role. And so what that afforded you was the opportunity to try a bunch of different roles and say, "Woo, that was a hard year. I don't think I'll do that again." Or "I really enjoyed something about that role, and how can I bring elements of that role into what I'm doing now?" And so I love the fact that if we can make it feel like more of a journey and not a ladder, it really does open up our ability to help people experience a number of different things before they start to really be able to step into what they're called to do in their purpose.
It really does. And I do feel like, when kids are in high school, it's like, oh, what's your major going to be? And they're supposed to have the answer. They're supposed to know exactly what they're going to do. I mean, how many people go to college and then, I was going to be pre-med. That didn't happen. So being able to say, you know what, I'm not sure, but I'm going to go that way and I'm going to try a bunch of stuff. I'm going to
Mhm.
fail hopefully I'll have some success. And then I'm going to find what I enjoy doing, what I love doing. And, when they get out of college, the same thing happens. So we try to help people that we hire here find their purpose, but some people take a little longer to do, and that's okay. There's no pressure.
This has been so good. I'm really surprised at how fast our time has gone. I've enjoyed this conversation. And what final thoughts would you have with for our listeners today?
Well, I think if we all just focus on what we're doing and trying to be the best that we can be, I've always found that people who are whole in their personal lives are better at work. And from my standpoint, as the leader of Jackson and Coker, we always talk about the whole person. Bring your full self to work. If you know it's okay to not be okay, all those things that again are common sense but you don't see in the workplace very often. I think those work environments are the ones that are thriving in today's world. And 79% of people may not feel appreciated and they may be, ready to take a new job. But there are good places to work out there where you have strong leadership and people help you become a better person. And when you can become a better person in your workplace, that's powerful.
Wow. Those are some amazing final thoughts. Tim, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you for having me.
Well, to our listeners, you can follow Tim on LinkedIn at Tim Fischer 44 or head over to jacksoncoker.com to learn more. And thank you today for listening to the Innovation Meets Leadership podcast. Remember, don't just get out of the box, break the box and set it on fire. Let's go transform something.
Thank you for joining us for the Innovation Meets Leadership podcast. Be sure to subscribe to our show on iTunes. Follow us on Instagram or Facebook at Innovation Meets Leadership. And visit our site at innovationmeetsleadership.com for more innovation resources.
Hey, my new book is out, Set It on Fire, The Art of Innovation. Click on the link to learn more. And don't just get out of the box, break the box and set it on fire. Let's go transform something.